right, let's get started. Welcome everyone, good afternoon. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping things. Closed captioning is available. If you are inside Zoom on a computer, click the CC button for closed captions. You may have to then click show subtitle. If you're inside Zoom on a mobile device, go to settings, then meeting, and toggle closed captioning on. We're posting a link for troubleshooting Zoom captions inside of the chat. To view captions outside of Zoom, whether because you're not on the Zoom call or if you might have to scroll back because you had to look away or the text is going by too fast, we have a link to an external browser window of captions that we're posting in chat and on the stream. There are also Spanish captions translated by AI, and we're posting that link in the chat as well. Okay, welcome to the, hold on, I'm getting instructions, y'all, sorry. Okay, yeah, everything that you need is in the chat for folks to follow in terms of Spanish translation as well as captioning. So welcome to the 8th webinar of the Justice Teams Network We Take Care of Us series, where we have been looking at non-carceral responses, non-punitive responses to community crisis. So we have looked at mental health response, we have looked at response to interpersonal violence, a bunch of stuff. You can see all of those on the JTN website and or our Facebook. Today we're looking at how we create community safety without the carceral state and work with individuals in our communities who commit harm, who enact harm in our communities. Yes, Daniel, please go ahead, excuse me.
Hola, buenas tardes. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos el día de hoy. Si necesitan la interpretación al español, por favor hagan clic en el mundo en la parte inferior de su pantalla y elijan el español. Muchas gracias.
All right. My name is Kat Brooks. I am the Executive Director of the Justice Teams Network. I'm also the co-founder of the Anti-Police Terror Project. Both of those organizations have been working specifically to create two models. One in response to mental health crisis, which we launched in Sacramento and will be launching in Oakland at the end of August, called MH First. The other is a model to respond specifically to interpersonal violence. And as we were having that conversation, we realized not only did we need to deal with survivors of that violence, but also figure out what transformative justice looked like for perpetrators of that violence. And for those of you that are in Oakland, you know that we've also had a successful win to create a task force that will be led by the most impacted members of our community to figure out, as we defund the Oakland Police Department by 50%, what are we refunding our community? And those are things to respond even to all types of violence, right? Because we know that police do not actually interrupt violence in our communities, they respond after the fact. And we need to be investing in things that are before the fact with community people that folks can trust. So I'm really excited about the folks that we have joining us this morning. So I want to shut up and let them get to talking. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, not the chat box. The chat box moves too quickly and I will lose your questions and then you'll be agitated with me. So put it in the Q&A so I can track it. We will get to as many of your questions as we can. Our first panelist is Reyna Sandoval-Beverly, a longtime activist and advocate with more than 25 years of experience working in community and specifically in the movement to end violence against women. Her work over the years has included work with boys and men in community and within the criminal legal system. She has held various leadership roles in community-based organizations and served on several local and statewide boards and committees, including the Calcasa Board. She's director of programs at Stand for Families Free of Violence. Her most important work is being the mother of 2 sons and is committed to their liberation and freedom. Take it away, Reina.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you so much for having us, for having this panel, for having this conversation. This is a conversation that, frankly, most folks don't want to have. They don't really want to include at the center those who've caused harm and really have begun to look at how do we begin to address this issue. And so thank you for having me, for having us address this very issue. So as you said, I'm with Stand for Families Free of Violence. It's a community-based organization in Contra Costa County. that works primarily with folks that have been impacted by intimate partner violence, gender-based violence. The work that we do is really an intervention, prevention, and treatment. The work that we really want to talk about today is really our work in our nonviolence program. And that really is the program where we work with folks who cause harm. When I think about the work that we do, and I know Lisa's here and is going to talk a little bit about the work that we do also, I think one of the things that I want to talk about is why we do this work, why we work with folks who cause harm. I think one of the things that I think about is that because survivors have said it's important to talk about this issue. Also, as someone who's been harmed in an intimate partner violence relationship, I know that it's important. As someone who has caused harm in relationships, I know that it's important to talk about. As what we know is that relationships are complex and nuanced. But as we've talked about, that I've been in the anti-violence, violence against women work for some time, what I would say is that for decades now, the anti-violence work has really worked to work with the critical immediate needs of survivors. And that is so important. And we've done good work, and we need to do more. We also have to address structural inequities. We must begin to look at other interventions besides the criminal and legal system. We must do that. We must look at the unhealthy socialization of men, and we must begin to look at the intergenerational trauma. So thank you for, and there's so much to say about this work. And so I think I want to pause and allow the other panelists to introduce themselves, but I'm excited to engage in this conversation.
Thank you, Reina. So next up, we've got Lisa Osborne, is the Nonviolence Program Manager at Stand for Families Free of Violence. She's a community organizer, a fierce advocate and activist that is committed to helping people, especially boys and men of color, restore connections to themselves, their intimate partners, their families, and their communities. She graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, with a bachelor's degree in social welfare and ethnic studies. Over the years, she has worked empowering homeless individuals, families, and at-risk youth to regain a life of self-reliance. Lisa.
Hi everybody. Thank you so much for having me, for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. As you said, I'm the Nonviolence Program Manager at Stand for Families Free of Violence. I come to this work with a short 3 years in this field. I came to this work seeking understanding, not only seeking understanding, but for family restoration, my belief in hope and healing for people. I come to this work as a survivor, as a person who has caused harm. The work that we do in the nonviolence program is really rooted in engagement and accountability. We also center the voices of survivors, being in healthy relationship. So I'm really excited to share a lot more about our program and to be a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Then this next person is someone I've had the pleasure of hearing speak several times, and I'm very excited to have him with us, very excited. Maestro Jerry Teo is the co-founder and director of capacity building at the National Compadres Network. He comes from a family of Mexican Tejan roots and was raised in South Central Los Angeles. He's an internationally recognized expert in the areas of men and boys of color, fatherhood, family strengthening, racial justice, racial healing, community peace and mobilization, and culturally based violence prevention intervention issues. Ooh. Over the last 40 years, he has dedicated his efforts to La Cultura Cura, or culture cures, to address community transformational healing from the effects of racial inequity and internalized oppression. His ideology is based on a belief that individuals and community have culturally based knowledge and wisdom that can prevent and heal the pain of relationship and community violence. He's the proud father of 3 children, Marcos, Renee, and Emilio, and grandfather of Amara and Naiya. Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you very much. Klaso Kamatli, Kometeor Noxtin Numekayetsin. I want to thank you and begin by thanking Creator, all the ancestors that have come before us. I want to thank you, all of you that are listening, and your ancestors for all that they have done in order to bring us to this place right now where we find ourselves in this dialogue, this journey of attempting to recover our sacredness and recover the sacredness of all people, and to heal from those internalized wounds that have been put on to us by many generations of racism and oppression and so many other things. You know, my journey, you know, it started way before me. My ancestors had wounds that were put on them, and I saw them come out in my mother and my father. I saw them in that relationship. I saw them in my brother that got locked up. I saw them in my sister that, you know, got pregnant at 15. I saw them in that difficulty in me growing up and trying to figure out how to be a man at 13 when my dad died. And I saw it in the community where I saw beautiful examples there in Compton where I lived of beautiful people with beautiful values, but I also saw the woundedness. And as a young boy, I was very confused. And so I think that's why I went to school to become a psychologist, because I was trying really to heal myself and heal my family. And I think that's the journey that motivates me. But throughout the years, you know, I found creators put me in different places, you know, and so I was one of the worked in gang violence reduction early on in my years in 1974. And then from there went to the East LA Rape Hotline. That's what it was called then. It's now the East LA Women's Center. I was the first male hired to work in sexual assault, and then went to the Centro Mental Health. We're trying to do culturally based healing centered work. From there, the national, the statewide child abuse issue forum, and Bienvenidos, where we worked a lot on fatherhood, teen fatherhood, and young boys and rites of passage. And now I'm at the National Compadres Network. And the way that started is that we wanted to do some work around this issue because there was no services culturally appropriate. But the other thing that was really internally bothering us as men, and especially men of color, is that a lot of the harm we were doing. So even though we knew about the racism and oppression, the difficulty is that we saw a lot of our own men hurting our families and hurting our relationships. And so we came together, gathered 19 men. And at that first gathering, what we realized that we were all jacked up, that we had wounds. And so that first meeting of us, and it's the basis of everything we do in the National Compadres Network for over 30 years, is the first step, first revolutionary step is healing ourselves, is decolonizing ourselves. It's recapturing the sacredness. And I'm very blessed to be here and really try and represent the many people all over this country that are trying to do this work of sacredness in relationships. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. And I'm actually going to start with you with my first question because of what the last sentence you said. We hear through the movement all over the place, you know, decolonize your mind, decolonize your diet, decolonize your clothing, right? It's sort of but what does that mean? What does that mean in practice? What does that work, and why is it so critical as we move towards a place of true liberation for all peoples?
Well, you know, it's very complex, but it's very simple. And you know, when the ancestors send us into this world, when a new baby is born, you know, there's a sacredness that comes in that baby, regardless of how that happened. Meaning, if two people were in a loving relationship or it just happened or whatever, when that baby comes, they come with the sacredness of their ancestors and that sacredness. And so that sense of sacredness and blessing and knowledge and wisdom is within us. And what we talk about in terms of decolonization, you can say it whatever you want, generational trauma, however you put it, is that through this historical process of devaluing people and destroying who they are trying to make them feel less valued, or if you will, killing their spirit, their true spirit. What begins to happen is the manifestation of wounded ways and wounded spirit, and even a wounded thought of who you are, to the extent that some men think violence is part of our culture, think that violence is part of who we are, that to be, you know, that the center of the family, the sense of family is really men being in a dominant position, where we understand in indigenous culture, where women are the center. We come from matrilineal culture. And so what we're finding now in healing is part of that throwing off or cleansing off from that mindset, that narrative, that false way of being, is really reclaiming, recovering the sacredness in our relationships, recovering both those aspects of wisdom, but that sacredness in relationship. And my job over all these years is then translating that into day-to-day, if you will, service, acknowledgement, treatment, intervention, capacity building. We do a lot of training, and if you will, it's really not training, it's just reminding you. You all know, we know. Any man that I work, any boy, they know. And I remember when I was a kid in Compton, Miss Mosley, who lived down the street, the grandma down the street, always sat on the porch, and little Tyrone was there messing up and doing something. Miss Mosley got up and said, "Baby, you know better. You know better." And I'm thinking, how can you know better? He's only 3. She says, no. And what we believe is you know better. When I work with men, I work with boys, you know better, man. You know you shouldn't be doing that. But sometimes the wounds are so much that you can't even see your sacredness anymore. You've been told that you're not sacred. You've been told that you're a perpetrator. You've been told that you're a delinquent. You've been told that you're not worth anything. You've been told all these negative things. You can't even see. You can't even hear. You can't even feel that sacredness and that voice anymore. So part of our work is decompressing and cleansing, from all of those things and reminding, but then holding people accountable, and especially men accountable to that sacredness. That's, I guess, in a nutshell. I mean, we could go on for a long time, but that's really that sacred work.
Thank you. Reina, I wanna turn to you. One of the things you mentioned, and I'd like you to expound upon that, particularly as communities across the country are looking at alternative responses to interpersonal violence that do not lead with law enforcement, that do not involve the carceral state. Can you say more about why it is so important to work with those who have actually caused the harm and what that work looks like? You mentioned intervention, prevention, and treatment.
Yeah, thank you. I just will say, just it's so wonderful to be here with Maestro Jerry Teo, and just to hear you. That's what this work is about. So those are the interventions. I just have to say, it's really about being in community and reminding folks of the essence of who they are, who their beautiful spirit is. So I just want to say that's so much about what this is, why it's so important. First of all, I just want to say why the carceral system isn't working. And I want to say, when we're talking about with folks who cause harm, you're also talking about other parts of the criminal legal system, right? We're talking about probation. We're talking about prison or parole. We're talking about child protective services. So those are also systems that are oftentimes folks are engaged in. And so the services that we're providing right now really is group work. It really is working with men who've caused harm. Most folks that come to us really come through the criminal justice system. Help is only available to folks after conviction. That's the reality for many of our programs in California anyway, is that help is only available once they've been convicted of a crime for many of our programs. So the program that we provide really is group work. It's really what most folks would call batterers intervention. We really are doing intervention. We're leading out our work really with the intention of holding out hope and healing, and really engaging men to be held accountable, yes, to be accountable for the violence that they've caused, but also to go beyond that, to look at what are the beliefs, what has happened to them, to really begin to explore the harm that has caused them to be violent. I'm not sure if I answered your question, so I want to I want to pause for a minute. Do you want me to really go deeper a little bit more in the work that we're doing in circle work? Would that be helpful? Or
yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think in our groups, again, our groups really are certified by probation. So I just really want to say that really is the contradiction, I think, in our organization, in that we really want to come together in community. We really want to bring together folks who've caused harm, and the reality is that they've come from probation. The probation department certifies our program. They are the sole authority of our programs. And so, so I just will say there is a contradiction there in some of the work that we do. But really the intention in our work is to create safe space for men to really begin to examine their own beliefs, their own behaviors, to be accountable for the harm that they've caused to community, to those that they're in relationship with, and to their own spirits, to themselves. And I think that that's what we provide an opportunity for them to do, is to really go there. When we talk about accountability, I do some work with a call to men. They often talk about accountability as an act of love. So when we call people, we don't call people out, we call people in. We really ask them to look at their own work. So that's some of the work that we do.
Lisa, you mentioned, well, it might have been Reina, but I'm going to throw the question to Lisa. When you do hear survivors say that they want, right, for their partners to heal and get healthy, that flies in the face of what, like, a lot of mainstream media sort of puts out there around interpersonal violence scenarios, right, where the survivor is always like, I'll gender this for this particular question, right? That the woman wants the man out, wants them in jail, wants them gone. The only answer is for the family to break up. Why is that actually not helpful or healing for our communities? And what are you actually hearing from survivors of violence in terms of what they want?
I think it really depends on the community that the survivor is actually in. But when you look at Black and Brown communities, they don't want their partners to go to jail and to have to deal with the justice system. They want the violence to stop. They want their families to stay together. Even if family staying together means separate households, but we're raising these children together. Are there still some type of connection within families? So what we're hearing from survivors is that we want the violence to stop. We want him to get help. We want our families to get help so that we can co-parent, or so that we can get our children back. Because like Reyna said, by the time people come to our groups, they have already been a part of the justice system, not only from probation, but also from Children and Family Services. And when we approach this issue, it is always most times approached under one lens, which is to separate, right? The person who has caused harm is really bad. They need help. Either they're in jail, they're mandated to come to these groups. But everyone else that is impacted is not considered: the children, the family, the community. I know Jerry said it a little bit earlier. This work, they know better and they do better. And none of, at least the men that we work with, are proud of the behaviors that they have. So they're not proud of the behavior. Hold on, I'm trying to slow down a little bit. They want help and they want the healing. They want their families. And that's what the survivors need. And there's so much limitations on us being able to come together and really provide that for the family.
Maestro Jerry, I want to turn back to you and get some of your thoughts about prevention, right? What models exist, or what models should exist that can get to our people before the cops do, before the state does, before the harm is caused?
Well, let me.
That's what we're.
Yeah, no, I feel you, and let me just say that it's difficult to really do this regrounding, this healing work in the systems that we live in right now, because we have been doing this work for a long time. We have a curriculum that works with men that cause harm called Healing the Wounded Male Spirit, but because probation thought we were not being punitive enough, because probation thought we were not being hard enough, when they looked at the curriculum, they didn't want to certify it. So unless you follow a certain edict, a certain way, a certain, if you will, combative way with certain men, and the reality is they know that combativeness. That's not how you get to their to their woundedness. If you provide, they'll front up, they'll do it all day. Let's say what you want them to say, just to sign that paper and get that. If we really want to talk about healing, we have to look at really what we're talking about here. And this is really some generational woundedness, some addictive behaviors. And let me just be real clear, as a clinician myself, for those people that live on the other side too, is that we also have to assess lethality. We have some people that are very, very wounded down to their spirits. And they will react based on the spirit. and we have to make sure that our communities are safe. So this does not mean that we're not really assessing, safety as well. That's a priority first. But after we do that, and I think the safety also comes from connection. I remember growing up in Compton, right? And our community was closer together, black, brown, we hang out together, we party together, run from the cops together, everything, together. But, if somebody went out of pocket, you would hit that person up. When I grew up, if you were violent towards a woman, you get hit up. You get hit up, if my uncle did something to that, I mean, all the men would go and check him, and so what has happened is we've had in our communities these accountability support systems. I would come home from school sometime, there would be what I would say a strange person in my house with her kids. And I'm saying, who's that? My mama says, tu tia, your aunt. I'd never seen her before. She says, go play with the kids. She was a stranger, but my mom called her my aunt. She's your relative. I would see bruises on her arms and stuff like that. And my mom would take her in. So we have had those systems that embraced, and the thing is that because we've been indoctrinated in this punitive system for so long, we've forgotten many of these ways. And the other thing is that we need the system to get out the way of really what we need to do, because there are models out there. And that's the reason why under the National Compadres we do a lot of training. The training we do is really, focus on this indoctrination that goes on with probation, with school, with social workers, even with mental health practitioners. We get Black and brown people get diagnosed and medicated at 50% higher rate. We get, so when we talk about prevention is at a lot of different levels. So that what we offer is and we've had to do this because we recognize unless you deal with it at all levels, unless you deal with it in terms of child development, unless you really help teachers, because in school, kids already are getting indoctrinated in a certain mentality. Boys are already fronting up and acting a certain way, all of those things that are going on. So we have early childhood programs, but we also have fatherhood programs for teen fathers. Yes, of course, programs that work directly with men who have issues of violence, but it's also substance abuse, because substance abuse is a critical issue in all of this. And then rites of passage. We have Joven Noble is a evidence-based. We had to get it evidence-based, but the reality is that helping young men, right, understand what manhood truly means and what sacred manhood truly means, and then help them deal with the day-to-day stuff. How do you stay sensitive and compassionate when you walk the street? You got to shield up because cops are looking at you, teachers are looking at you. As you front up, and how do you know how to take that shield down when you walk in your house? Some get so locked into that shield that they think that's who they are. So when we talk about prevention, intervention, all of these things, they're really a combination of things, And part of our work really is integrating culture at the base, the sense of sacred culture, not false culture, sacred culture. And even, let me just say, we have to address certain of the woundedness in some of our cultures that has been integrated, that internalized oppression. Part of that work is the prevention work when you're talking with moms that are raising boys, because they are raising these boys sometimes in a very, a misogynistic, patriarchal way too. So if we're talking about, really addressing this issue, it's intersectional, it's complex, but it really is embracing our cultural generational healing ways in order that we can raise sacred relationships. And you can go on our website and see the specifics of that. We have objectives and evaluation criteria and all of that, and methodologies. All of that is in place, because our people of color are that wise too. Our ancestors are that wise too. They had evidence-based practice, right? My grandma had evidence-based practice. You walked in, she could tell if you were acting right or not. She knew the evidence, right? So I just want to say that much. I mean, I'll leave it there. I don't know if I answered your question, but let me say one more thing. Gathering with men, relationships is the center of everything. So I have my own circle that I've been going, and I'm supposed to be the expert, but I have my own circle where I'm not guiding. I'm still doing my healing. I'm still doing my work. I have men that will check me. Even as an elder, they check me, and I need that. We need places where we can lovingly check each other, lovingly bless each other, lovingly welcome each other, because unless you're in relationship, unless you see, other men that can give you counsel on what to do and what not to, how do you handle certain things, because it's not easy, then it's very difficult. If you can't see it and feel it and you don't hear it, and it's not been in your life, then it's hard to really integrate it. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. That got me thinking about, as I'm thinking about the health of our communities and thinking about how many of our men in Black and brown communities are shipped off to what I call American concentration camps. Can Reina or Lisa, you talk about how that too is violent in our communities and prevents us from building healthy and thriving communities, and just, creates a cyclical pattern of violence, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole criminal legal system, right? It doesn't sustain safety. It doesn't help folks. It doesn't foster safety. It doesn't effectively contribute towards healing the harm, getting to root causes. It just doesn't, right? So what happens is we are locking folks up. We're locking them away, as opposed to really talking about healing the harm, really going deep around the pain and the violence that happened to them. So those systems that we're putting folks in, whether it's the child protective services, we're removing children from homes, we're sending folks to prison, and so that's not healing. That's not a place where folks are being helped necessarily. That's a form of a continued form of punishment, a continued form of violence. So we need other programs, really, that really is addressing the root cause of the harm and allowing people to really be embraced and do some of their own work.
And I guess the follow-up question to that, and anyone can take it, is what harm does it do to a community to not have family units? I mean, Maestro Jerry, you've been talking about culture and tradition. You talked about your grandma's pots, when we first started. Like, what does that do to us as a people, where our family units are being ripped apart, and how does that interrupt our ability to build safe and thriving communities?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is feeling devalued and deplaced. So our family dynamics and they're our support system. They are the people who hold us accountable first. We are tearing families apart, and you're feeling devalued and you're feeling expendable. That's how you move, and that's how you begin to also treat other people. It's the same thing as when we lock our Black and brown folks up. That's the first thing to do. It's that same thing, is that feeling to feel expendable. I hear so much from the men, the impact that it has on them to be separated from their children when the incident that took place was with mom and not with child. Child may not have been there, but now dad can't see or have any interactions with child for 6 months. Now that parent and child relationship is now broken, right? And where does that leave the child? So those are some of the first things that come to my mind when you ask that question.
What's important is to recognize that kinship, is extended. So I have, over the years, dealt with a lot of young people say, I don't have a dad. I didn't have a dad. I don't know. I said, well, I can't be your dad, but I'll be your uncle. You can call me Teo. You can call me uncle, right? And I have so many young people call me uncle. Now they call me grandpa, but that's a whole different story. But the thing is that we as communities need to recognize that we don't need to fit into these Western-oriented systems. We can become each other's relatives. We can become each other's guides. We can become each other's examples. We just have to step into that, right? Now, the problem is the system doesn't give us validation for that. So we should be funding grandmas. We should be funding grandpas. We should be funding people in communities. You want to stop violence in school? Put a grandma in every classroom. and let that grandma bless all the kids up, right? You want to stop
Yes.
the violence in the halls, put some grandpas, some OGs that, first of all, they got to go some training themselves, right? Because they got some trauma. But after you send them and remind them of the significance of their presence, just their presence and acknowledging a young man, how you doing today? Good to see you. That acknowledgement that somebody sees you, that somebody wants to see you, that somebody missed you yesterday, you know, is so profound. So you know, we, with the National Compadres Network, and I'll just mention the Brotherhood of Elders, right? We have a kinship network. We formed together, you know, the Babas and the Maya, we are together. We have come together as community because we recognize we live together in community. And if we don't form that bond, this system and this society will make us as enemies. They will try and break us up, right? So we recognize that that's part of who we are. And we must intentionally form those relationships and those bonds. Now, the difficulty in terms of men and boys that have caused harm, and I've been doing this work for a lot of years, is there's still a fear, you know, and in our systems, you know, again, and I give a lot of acknowledgement to the women, and especially women of color that have pushed to move beyond the separation of men and women in this work. It's been the women of color that I've dealt with that say, no, we need to deal with our men. And they've gotten pushed back by white women, right?
Yes.
Over the years, you know, so I want to just acknowledge the women that have allowed us to come back, that have invited us to come back, because we've always wanted to be part of the solution, you know. But it's a system that says you can only get funding, and believe me, the funding track, if you include men, you don't get funded. I mean, there are, you know, funding tracks that like that. So we have to break down all those barriers to allow the true intervention, prevention, healing aspects to come through in the way that truly does heal us. And one other thing I want to mention, because we mentioned the criminal justice system and juvenile justice system, you know, and I'm saying it now because I've seen it for a long time, you know, and I know Call the Men talks about men in boxes. You know what? The men that we work with, if you sit with them, if you acknowledge them, we say men don't talk. No, yes, they do. You put them in a safe place and you open it up and they share things. And one of the things that I want to lift up, because I've seen this over the years and it's more prominent now, men are coming out of institutions that many of people don't realize. They know it, but they don't even want to talk about it. That when men go in there and daily sometimes they get strip searched, they get violated, right? That way. And then when they come out, we say, now be intimate, without healing that violation that has happened to them sexually. You know, and so when men begin to, we understand the wounds that are deep, that are really deep. You know, we have to understand that there's a complexity of the wounds that men carry. Unless we're ready to truly deal with those deep wounds, we're not going to heal all of this, right? It's not just about stop the violence and let's look at the power, you know, control. No. It's something deeper, and this is generations old. So if we're going to do this work, we got to prepare ourselves. The work we do at the National Compadres is really guiding people through a process to get them ready. You want to really do healing, you want to really, let's get ready, because you know, there's a lot of work to do here, and it starts with us. We got to do our own work first. We got to get prepared and deal with our own wounds first, you know. But you know, I'm really encouraged by, you know, all this discussion and the inclusion and the blessing. You know, let's do this work together.
Yeah, I love so much of what you said, because I think when you talk about men want these spaces for men and they want to talk, that is what we find. You know, initially they may come and they may, you know, be defending their character and they might say, I didn't do this. And that's, again, because what, you know, providers are told is this is who they are, that they are the crime that they've committed, right? It's not until we really begin to ask, who are you? What matters to you? Tell me about your family, right? They want to be in community. That's what we find, is we find that if you allow them, if you listen deeply, they'll talk to you. They'll tell you, right? But we've got to prepare ourselves as folks who are in this work to really be able to listen. And listen with our heart, right? To really listen to, we do want to hold them accountable. We do want to hold them accountable to the harm that they've caused, but we also need to seek to understand I have found to be really important. So I think that's such an important point. When they say men don't want to talk about this. Yeah, they do. At least we find that they do. What we have found is men want to come back.
Yeah.
Right. And they will say, can we come back? Of course you can come back. Right. Yeah. One of the things we really prioritize, the voices of the folks that we're in partnership with. And that's how we really look at our work. We are in relationship. We are in partnership with folks that we work with. And so we really want to know what does help look like? What does healing look like for you? Right. We did we really asked folks. What we found, we asked 72 folks who are in our program, 51, and this was really a 4-page, and 51 folks answered. 45% of them said they would want to continue to do this work, that they want to come back, right? And so that's what we've got to start doing, right? We have to look at other models that we're allowing folks to heal, and healing doesn't happen in 52 weeks. Healing doesn't happen overnight, right? We got to continue to do our own work, and they have to continue. But it's about being in partnership and then inviting folks to continue to do this work.
Yeah.
I want to not gloss over something that Maestro Jerry said that I think is so important, and it has framed a lot of our work at Justice Teams and with Anti-Police Terror Project, but particularly as we're looking at the issues of interpersonal violence, domestic violence, and the role of white women and white feminists in particular in shaping that movement, and what I want to believe the unforeseen harm that it did to our communities, and that we've always wanted our men engaged, and yes, we want to hold them accountable, but we also want them home. We want to hold them accountable. We also want them to be fathers to our children. We want to hold them accountable, and we want to build community. And pushing back against, the 40 years of the DV movement, which was like about lock them up and throw away the key, which primarily meant Black and brown bodies, has been a really difficult but really critical piece of this work that we're doing. So I just wanted to highlight that. You made me cry too, Maestro Jerry, as you were saying it, because we do want y'all. We want you deeply, and we want to be walking this road in partnership and dealing with our trauma together as a unit. Yin yang balance. So I'm really glad that you brought that up for us again. You've talked about, everybody has mentioned, alternative models. So I'm going to ask you all to do an imagination exercise with me. And then I promise I'll get to some of the questions that others have asked. But we are in this moment, right, of defunding the police and refunding the community. This is the rallying cry that is across the country. And so if we could defund, police and refund community in terms of a particular community-based model, meaning, right, like the call doesn't go to 911, the call goes to the Compadres Network, the call goes to MH First, the call goes to what are the possibilities of what that could look like in terms of a holistic response. And so Lisa, I'll start with you, and then we can go to Reina, and then Maestro Jerry. So this is like, and yeah, this is also isn't a futile exercise. We are taking furious notes, and people are listening as people are really trying to bring these things into life for our folks.
Sorry, so just so that I understand the question, you're asking what are alternatives to calling police, ideally, like what that would look like.
Yeah, what model look like that is born and led by us?
Yeah. I think the first thing that first comes to my mind is defining community, right? For me personally, when I've been in my personal experience, what I identified as community, my partner did not. So someone intervening could have put me at more in harm's way than anticipated. But when I think about community response, I think about just educating people in community, getting young folks, elderly folks involved, but making sure that they have a understanding of what it means, the complexities of domestic violence, the complexities of interpartner violence. I think about overall community engagement. So HUDs, right? HUDs where people can come to community, that's led by community, led by leaders in the community. I think of also rallies, right? For folks who don't feel safe to necessarily show up to that, so that the information is getting out. I think of warm handoffs. So yeah, so those are some of the things I think of personally, and to also not to separate the issue as though this thing of domestic violence and interpartner violence for people who caused harm is a man thing. It's a people's thing. So women also have the ability to cause harm. And I think that when we understand that as a community, then we can stand side by side as a gender and really uplift the issue to create healing.
I love that, Lisa, when you said, what are we talking about when we say community, right? And so one of the things I think that we always want to do is it needs to be culturally rooted, community owned, and we need to ask community. We need to ask folks, what does help look like? What does healing look like for you? So we got to go into community and ask, right? What would it look like? What would a response look like? What would safety look like? And I love what you said around warm handoffs, right? I mean, I think, do we have folks in community that, they can see when things aren't going well, right? Are we available to, are we able to help folks? So when we think about services that are available, or what are the helps that are available to those who have been harmed, right? It's resources. What we find for folks that who've harmed, those resources aren't available for them. Employment opportunities, housing, financial resources, counseling supports, those supports often aren't available to those who've caused harm. So I think those kinds of community responses have to be embedded in community, right? And so where do folks go? Do folks go to church? Folks go to churches. Folks go to, as Lisa said, as hubs in communities, the elders in communities, right? That's where we've got to start sending resources there and supports there, training up those folks.
Well, thank you. Yeah. One of the things is when we talk about regrounding, because we all have to reground, because if we talk about community, some of our community has already been indoctrinated too. If you ask some communities, say that we're not gonna get rid of police. No, how are we gonna stay safe, man? We need police, right? And it reminded me of, when I was dealing with some of my health, and my daughter says, you need to give up that steak, Dad, to give up that hamburger. I said, heck no, I love steak, I love barbecue, I love ribs. She says, Dad, you need to give up that red meat. No, how am I gonna give up that? She says, let me make you something. What? Let me make you something else. And she made me something that says, not good? I said, yeah, that's good. She says, let me make you another dish. That tastes good. My wife says, hey, I'm gonna make you this, and one of them even looked like steak. I said, "Dang, are you sure it's not steak?" But they gave me an alternative, and then I began to understand there's a different way. But before it was just like, I got to give up this, and I'm afraid because I really like this, and this makes me feel whole, makes me feel safe. I think it's a process, and it's a process by many of our communities have been indoctrinated with fear, and the fear is real. Let's not not face that. The fear is real. There is danger many times in communities, and there is, all of that in there. So community wants to know, how do you keep us safe? And so I think we have to do some work, first of all, in terms of reconnecting, in terms of dialogue, in terms of building conversation, in terms of remembering how we, support each other. And then I think we have to prepare. One of the things that we're doing, that's the alternative model. We, with the Brotherhood of Elders, are establishing a Healing Generations Institute. And part of that is to explore the significant aspects of healing and reparation and grounding from a cultural-based point of view. What does that look like? What does that feel like, right? And then how do we bring that to communities so that there's community capacity in different realms? Some people are good with children. Some people are good with young people. Some people can really have that palabra, if you will. They got the word. They're not afraid to go and talk with an OG and say, hey, brother, you know what? Can I holler at you a little bit? Can I talk to you? Orale, vato, come here, let me talk to you, And they have that. They have that ability to relate, right? It's all about relationships. So we have to build that capacity at different levels with different situations so that communities then have, if you will, a kinship of healing and support within them, right? So depending on the circumstance, you call different people up in that way. But that's gonna take some preparation. That's gonna take some dialogue. It's gonna take some own some rethinking on our own part. We have to reconceptualize what this all means. And then we have to put it into a framework. And we've done a lot of that work already, but we have to do it in conjunction with community. And then we have to legitimize it so that, you know, it can be supported. Because I'll tell you one of the things, we've been talking about healing for years. You know, people don't want to fund us. Oh no, that's touchy feely. Oh no, what's the evidence base? How do you measure spirit connection? How do you measure, you know, the sense of cultural integrity? You know, if they want you to do it using Western models, no, you need to allow us even in our evaluation and research. So I want to acknowledge Dr. Heriberto, our evaluator, who has really explored with elders the significance of what it means to even use evidence and research to be able to quantify what it really means to have a community or a family or a person that is whole. So I think we have the knowledge. You know, culturally, our ancestors were brilliant, and they got the knowledge, they got the brilliance in us. We just have to have the support and give us the legitimacy to be able to put forth what is really, really needed. And I think we have to come together as a community that way, you know, and we have to challenge other models, you know, that way. I want to acknowledge, you know, we're doing some work in the East LA, and at that agency that I used to work at, that's now called the Women's Center, you know, and they work with women that are battered and sexual assault and all that, but they've opened up a space for us men to gather. Our East LA men's circle gathers there, right? And they had to talk to the other women about that. And what they've seen is these group of men that have come that they were afraid of in the beginning now they're seeing a different aspect of men that want to heal and want to gather. So we have to even shift the spaces and how we use spaces, you know, to do that. Should be spaces in schools and all over the place. But we can do it as long as we're supported. And it's part of what we're doing at National Compadres with the Brotherhood of Elders and with other people across the nation, building these healing dialogues and these healing circles.
One of the things you reminded me of, you know, you started talking about remembering, that we need to remember who we are. We also need to remember what we used to do, right? In community, there were safe homes. Like you said, you know, you might have a new tia in your house, right? So we have to remember, though, how can we build our community's capacity to make safe spaces in community? Where do folks go? When I think about, where could I go? Where could I have went? You know, is there somewhere that I could go in community that's safe, right? Because the reality is some folks may come to organizations like ours and other folks may not, right? Who are the first responders? Oftentimes they are neighbors. They are folks in community. So how do we begin to prepare those folks in community to see it, how to respond safely, appropriately, how to have conversations with folks, and then how do we create safe places in community? Where are those safe homes folks could go to?
Right.
You know? Yeah.
You know, I want to mention one other thing that you know, especially in this time of COVID, I'm getting so many calls from people that saying, hey, help me with this. I'm a little bit anxious. I don't want to go off. What do I do? You know, I mean, my kids are driving me crazy. You know, I'm used to being with, you know, my family. I love my family, but man, you know, there's no sports on. I don't know how to decompress, you know. And my wife is getting calls from so many women that are saying the same thing, you're right. And they said, well, I can't be on a Zoom call because people hear me. So they're texting, right? So we need, and now is a tremendous opportunity for us to build alternative support systems that don't even have to be in space, in a space. They can be virtual, right? That we need to think of other ways of how to support one another. We're doing prayer circles, you know, on Zoom, right? We're offering prayers, we're drumming, we're singing chants, we're reminding people, we're getting people inspired, right? Reminding them and I think so we need to be creative. It's not just about stopping harm, but it's about watering the blessings. And it's about remembering your traditions. It's about singing your songs. It's about honoring your people, right? And then it's teaching skills to go along with that, right? And let me just say that this is not about half-stepping or not making people accountable, you know, because even in our communities, you know, we need to have ways of, you know, making people accountable. And that goes all the way from somebody in the street to a politician or, you know, somebody that's considered a community leader or, you know, a spiritual leader, whatever. All of that needs to be part of this system as well. How do we bring accountability in a compassionate way, but one that brings safety and healing to communities?
What are some examples, and this can be for anyone, we have just 3 minutes left. I'm sorry, attendees, I'm not gonna get to all of your questions, but we're gonna put information for all of our panelists in the chat, and you can reach out to them directly. But we use that word accountability a lot. What are some examples of accountability inside of a non-carceral, non-punitive framework? Like, what does that actually look like?
Lisa, I don't know if you want to talk. I was just talking, so I don't want to.
Oh no, you're okay. I'm still processing.
Okay. Reina?
Yeah, I think it's really acknowledging what they've done, right? One of the things that we do in our group is really have them stand before, they really have to talk about the violence that they cause. And we have them really go there around what was the type of violence that they used, right? What did they do? And we really, so it's really acknowledging that,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, I think, yeah, so, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I'll just add this on, and then you can answer both. And then what does that look like in terms of balancing the needs of folks that experience the harm, right? With the type of accountability and the balance of folks that experience the harm. Maestro.
Well, I again, it's that connection. You know, what happens when you are violent or you harm somebody, you're really disconnecting from who you really are. You're really disconnecting from your heart and your true spirit. So part of it is bringing acknowledgement and understanding to let me remind you of who you are, brother. Let me remind you. And the same thing is for somebody that's been harmed. Let me acknowledge you and connect with you so that we can make sure you're safe, make sure that you're heard, right? It's really that the healing starts with that first acknowledgement and then that embrace and acceptance. And then we go through the other process to healing. And I think sometimes, I mean, I'll tell you straight up, I've had men that are so wounded that I've had to take them out of the home because it wasn't safe for them to go back there. And so I've had to find other places for them, right? Because of their addiction, because of their woundedness, because of their addictive behaviors. It wasn't just, okay, we acknowledge what you did. No, I could feel in their spirit. I don't trust you to go back there, brother. So there are ways of doing this. We have to have spaces that are not based on incarceration. We have to have those spaces too, that we can put people in that will hold them accountable, keep them there, but also make sure there's safety in the community, And there are, those are things that I think we can create and have been created. They're created all day long, by the way, by communities without us even knowing it.
Yeah, and I just want to say, because folks, we really are asking folks to understand why they've caused harm or what they've done or what's happened to them, doesn't mean we're not holding them accountable. Doesn't mean that just because someone completes a class doesn't mean they're done with their healing. We sometimes have said, you're not done. You got more work to do, right? And so there's other services, other supports that are needed, right? One of the things that we might consider is, how are we really wrapping around more supports and services for those who've caused harm, right? Why aren't we having accountability look like some therapy? Why aren't we providing therapy for folks, right? Or for other services, case management, right? We often don't wrap around services for those who've caused harm, right? We send them to one group. Mm-hmm. So I think we really have got to look at accountability can look different, right? It can look like providing other supportive services that can have them really be accountable to do their own healing work. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to learn skills and tools, right? Because that's what's so critical, is that they learn to do it differently, right? They learn how to process their feelings differently, that they learn how to express their behaviors differently.
Mm-hmm. I think also holding them accountable is also helping them understand the impact that their behavior has on themselves first, and then on their family, their community, and all those that are around them. Having the ability, like one thing we do in group is that we have them say what they did and then say how the person they harmed may have felt. So when I broke her cell phone, she may have felt unsafe because she couldn't call someone. So to really put themselves in the person's shoes that they have impacted. But first, understand how it has impacted you. What was going on for you to act that way?
You know, I also just want to mention that, you know, we talked about generational wounds. You know, many people have many issues, and it's really important for us to really address the complexity of their issues. Some have issues, addictive behaviors, and they have to deal with the addictive behaviors. I mean, they can be in front of you and cry and say they do it, but if they go back to drinking or smoking a little blunt, they're right back there. You know, others have mental health issues. Some really have some, you know, some issues related to, that's gotten into their nervous system, that's gotten into their psychological thinking, and they need some mental health, but it has to be mental health care that is culturally based and spiritually focused. You know, it can't just be you send them to a therapist. So, you know, let's recognize that many times we have, you know, many people have complex issues that contribute to then the harm. And if we don't address all of those issues, then we can send them to a 52-week class. You can send them to rites of passage all day long. You can put them in circle all day long, right? Everybody's now circling up and think it's going to heal the world. No, there's some other complex issues that we need to include as part of the support system.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that.
All right, that takes us to 103. I will take that as your closing statements. I want to thank each of you so much for joining us and for your wisdom and your work and your blessings on our community. So Maestro Jerry Teo, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lisa Osborne, thank you so much. Reyna Sandoval-Beverly, thank you so much. And thank you everybody who joined. Enjoy the rest of your Friday afternoon.